Now, in the digital age, misinformation spreads faster than ever, especially during elections when emotions run very high. Political stakes, when emotions run high and political stakes are even higher. From doctored images to deep fake videos and misleading headlines, fake news has become a dangerous tool for political manipulation, voter suppression, and public confusion. This debate explores how fake news undermines electoral integrity, distorts public opinion, and weakens democratic processes, while some argue that misinformation is a direct threat to democracy. Others also caution against limiting free expression in the name of regulations. So the big question is fake news to be treated as a criminal offense? And who should be responsible for verifying information? Should it be the various platforms, government, or individuals? And how can voters protect themselves from digital deception? All of these and more are what our guests on today's debate will be discussing and providing solutions to. So be a part of this program as we unpack the growing influence of fake news on electoral processes and explore solutions that safeguard both democracy and freedom of speech. Our guest for today's debate is the Vice President of the Ghana Journalists Association, GJA. She is also the Chief Editor-in-Chief with the state broadcaster, the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. She is Rebecca Ikpe, and she is also an award-winning broadcast journalist and a media advocate. Madam Rebecca Ikpe, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher.
Right, and next is David Morgan Asogba Metonji. He is the director of Morgan Training, a consultancy firm that deals with capacity building and geopolitics. He is also the author of the book Making the ECOWAS of the People a Reality. Mr. David, welcome to the program once again.
Thank you for having me, and greetings to Mrs. Rebecca.
Right, thank you very much once again. So, lady and a gentleman, welcome to the program, and let's get the debate underway. So, as we begin, let me begin with you, Madam Rebecca Ikpe, and we want to find out that, what are your preliminary assessments of the term fake news, and how is it different from bias reporting or opinion piece?
Thank you very much, Christopher. Good morning, Morgan, and good morning, everyone. In Ghana, when people get on radio and TV, they like to greet their constituencies and all their family members and everything. That's like we have to charge them anyway and send them the bill. But anyway, good morning, Africa. I'm so delighted to be on WADR. Radio is my first love. So for me, hey, anything radio, I'm for it. So yeah. So Christopher, now the issue about fake news. Your question was fake news.
From bias reporting or opinion piece.
Opinion piece. Now, let me put into context that information, which is news, information, news, is a very, very important product when it comes to the overall communication in a democracy. In fact, governance and everything to do with it, information is the most critical ingredient in all of it. In fact, any government that pays less attention to information is already on a failure trajectory. And you would realize that even in elections, candidates that have focused heavily and also, I would say, invested heavily in information and their communication have always triumphed. Having said that, information is very critical to the whole conversation about governance and democracy. That places a heavy responsibility on the issue of the news, which is why fake news, call it false news, is a huge disincentive to our democracy. Now, Fake news is simply false news. In your preliminary, I would say, introduction, you mentioned the issue of fake news providing what we call to sway the electorate.
Yeah. Confusion.
Confusion, you use the word manipulation, distort opinions. Clearly, fake news is about false news. Its intention is to ensure that it's damaging. That's the whole intention. And so it is problematic, and it should be a cause for concern to all well-meaning people who believe in democracy, believe in rule of law. And in fact, for us within the media, journalism, information ecosystem, false news should be a cause for concern for us. If the intention is to distort, if the intention is to derail, and if the intention is to damage, that should be a cause for concern. That's my preliminary,
right. And so
assessment. But the question about how different
is it
is
from
false
bias?
news?
Yes. From
So you
bias
see, clearly
reporting
it's
and
different.
opinion piece.
Clearly different. Clearly different. Biased opinion and then opinion pieces not necessarily may not have the intent to damage, may not have the intent to provide false information. However, there could be snippets of misinformation, false news within opinion pieces as well as biased reporting, which is why the word biased is very important for us to look at. And in fact, in communication, we say that you should understand your biases, understand the biases in people that you are going to speak to and people that are going to listen to you. And in fact, the host, like yourself, who are moderating panels during a communication, you must understand the biases of the host who will be moderating and what kind of questions will be asked and to whom and when and what are they trying to elicit? Are they trying to sway? Are they trying to distort? So the biases for me are very important in all this communication. And in fact, we are taught in Journalism 101 that we should listen to all sides. And so we are featuring all sides of the issue. And so we are not only looking at one side, which is biased. So let's feature all the sides. Journalism 101.
Yeah.
In the issue of opinion pieces, that would be like news commentaries, people giving their perspectives on issues. Clearly, it's very different from false news.
Right.
And those are opinions. Sometimes there's a research to it where people actually back it, but that's their opinion. And in fact, they are entitled to their opinions. And information and communication, we should listen to all sides and listen to people's opinions. In Ghana, in the Tree language, we call it Kebina Min Kebi.
Okay.
Which means that you say, I say, and then that grows our democracy. Because in fact, politics is about context of ideas. And it's important to our democracy as well.
Right. Thank you very much, Madam Rebecca Ekpe, with that opening submission. And of course, giving a clear distinction between fake news, bias reporting, and opinion piece. However, she made it very clear that in the context of bias reporting and opinion piece, there could be some snippets of fake news in there. That means that it is still a matter of worry that we ought to be very high alert in order to detect that. But let me switch to Mr. David Morgan Asogba and find out from him, since he is a geopolitical expert and has been following conversations continentally as well as in the sub-region. Want to find out that from what you have observed so far, how has fake news influenced recent elections in Africa, particularly in the sub-region, and per se you can also extend it to the global stage as well?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. In fact, I was about to just run away after listening to the amazing explanation of Mrs. Eke. So I don't know if I'm still entitled to speak on it, but the explanation was so clear that I am very comfortable addressing the issue looking at the geopolitical perspective. Because when you look at the issue of fake news and biases and opinion pieces, you can understand that this is not new to the world of politics. It is something that has been used so much in politics that it is the only issue today is that we have a very amazing digitalized world that makes it very huge, that increases its impact when it is used. And that is our challenge. And that is a very threat to any professions that deals with communication. And communication is about our life. It's everything we do. There is no aspect of life or profession where you are not interested in communication. So when you look at it from a geopolitical perspective, it is a tool that has been used in every single attempt to reach political goals. So the reason why people like you and I exist, including Mrs. Ekpe, is that we are supposed to have developed a certain level of expertise that could enlighten people into decision making process. And when I'm talking about people into decision making process, I'm referring to the citizen as well as the decision makers at different levels in the world. So this is something that has seriously influenced geopolitics and politics everywhere in the world, especially in West Africa. And today it is even affecting the ability of state leaders to come together in dealing with key threats to the regional process. When you look at this issue of security, we know how far fake news have probably impacted the decision-making process. When you look at the aspect of, let's say, regional integration, seeing Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso stepping out, we know that at a certain level, we've had fake news intervening. But all these things makes it so difficult because the news is just like the blood in a system. And it is difficult to remove the fake from the genuine blood, let's say, elements simply because it is part of what we take in. And the what we take in today is made of different aspects. You have a genetical modified issue that we take in. You have there is a lot of aspect that has to do with bias, but there are also other aspects that are genuinely made up and inserted in our diet. So it's very challenging and it is very, very well used. It has been used for centuries, but nowadays it is far more impacting the political decision making process and even the way states come together and work. So there is a need of expert that could really specialize and be able to provide leaders with genuine analysis here. Sorry for the background news. I have my own
Very well.
my
Very well. So okay. So now you touched about how sometimes political actors obviously become perpetrators of fake news, and I would want to still stay with you, David, and then find out in brief that are political actors always, or sometimes there are external forces that are main drivers of election-related disinformation in the region, particularly in the South region. We've seen from last year through to, in recent time, there are elections really happening. Cote d'Ivoire is going to the polls just this October. Next year, Benin is also going to the polls. Gambia is also going to the polls. And recent disinformation happenings is it only the political actors, or they have a whole lot of team that are deliberate about pushing this whole fake news agenda?
Yeah, and your question is very welcome, and I can guarantee you that it is every single aspect of it. You have fake news that are just made out of the envy and the opportunity of reaching the buzz. You know, there are people who want to have some buzz, and when you look at the media environment, the more you have some very attractive and seductive news, even if it is right or no, you will have views. And people are looking for views. They want to have that buzz on the social media because it is money driving for them. So they are keen and ready to create a news that will got the attention of people. But aside them, you also have people with very specific agenda. And this is actually part of the game. So they need to cook. That is why in our political environment, we have the expression propaganda, you know. And when you want to do anything as propaganda, you need to make sure that you have your stories that could really help you to reach your targets. And when you have to do that, sometimes you don't need to say the truth of the fact. You need to create a story, to make it up, and to insert it in order for that fake news to serve your targets and your purposes. And this is something that has been used, as I said, for a very long time. It is not new. The only issue today is that the impact of any fake news anywhere is very critical and should be addressed with seriousness from decision makers to the people. So there is a need, whether you like it or not, of enhancing people's skills in terms of how do they identify something that is close to fake to something that is close to the fact. And there is also a need for the decision makers to have a team of experts that will allow them to not take decision based on fake news, because it is possible with the artificial intelligence today. It is extremely difficult for anyone who is not initiated to make a difference between a news that is being fake from a news that is genuine. And sometimes you get confused because what you tag as a fake news could reveal to be actually the real fact on the ground, and what you believe is the real fact on the ground could become and identify as fake.
Right. It's still 94.9 FM West Africa Democracy Radio, and the program is Citizens. Today's debate is about fake news and its impact on elections. Be a part of this particular conversation via our social media platforms, and of course, you can also send your thoughts and contributions to our email wadr@wadr.org. At this point, let me switch to Ghana, as Rebecca Ekpe, the Vice President of the Ghana Journalists Association, also a practicing journalist and a chief news editor-in-chief of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, is also on the debate panel as well. So, Madam, I'm asking that as journalists, how should we assimilate information, as we are the gatekeepers? Assimilate information, process it through all of our fact-finding mechanisms before we disseminate it to the public in order to curb the rising rate of fake news.
Your question was, how can gatekeepers manage the issue of fake news, correct?
Yes, before we disseminate. Definitely.
Before we disseminate. Okay,
yes,
so yeah, great articulation there from Morgan on the issues, and with artificial intelligence being a threat now, in fact, a huge threat. Like you said, fake news has always been there. It's just the magnified and the huge impact given the technological, dimension to it, and now artificial intelligence. Now, that from where I sit at the Ghana Journalists Association, we have made it clear. The Ghana Journalists Association has a lot of interventions when it comes to the issue of fake news. For example, our stand is that fake news is there just because of one of many things. We need some sort of illiteracy, or let me say literacy for that matter, media literacy. People to understand the dimensions or the magnitude of the issue. You know, if you have a problem and you identify a problem, that's the beginning of the solution. So identifying the problem, giving a face and a name to it, you know, a certain understanding of what the problem is one. And GJA, in partnership with a number of organizations such as the Media Foundation for West Africa, we've had a number of training opportunities, building capacity. And I know Morgan is coming from, he understands what I'm talking about when it comes to building the capacity of journalists. Building the capacity of journalists many times. In fact, capacity building never ends. It's ongoing because we believe that we need to, it's like advocacy. You have to keep hammering and hammering and hammering. So this is where Ghana Journalists Association's position is on the issues that GJA is concerned, and reiterates that we need to build the capacity of our journalists to understand the magnitude of the problem we have about fake news, misinformation, and disinformation within our media ecosystem. In fact, we engage media owners to understand what the magnitude is. In fact, you would also know that we have identified the problem based upon research that have been done by the Media Foundation for West Africa. Media Foundation for West Africa consistently has done research with media radio monitoring. And that it's radio monitoring, I believe you may have come across some of those reports during elections. The infractions of these issues mostly have come with private media, unfortunately. Private media, unfortunately. So in our training, we concentrate on helping journalists within these private media organizations to understand the magnitude of the problem and to help them in their work to identify fake news and be able to combat them. And I think that it has been quite phenomenal. And I'll say it has been quite we've achieved a lot in doing that. We've had good results and good feedback. And 2024 elections is one of them. You said it clearly in your beginning, or my question to me, that a radio station or a journalist, was discovered pointing out that voting for candidate A on this day, and then we'll go and vote for candidate B on another day. Meanwhile, we know that constitutionally in Ghana's 1992 constitution, December 7th is the election day. This is a very clear example of fake news. Clearly, a lot of people came down on this station, including journalists themselves. And that tells you that people are alert, or were alert, and they knew how to quickly, fish out these issues. So clearly, other stations, almost every other station was on the throat of this media house to retract and correct the issues. That tells you that people were alert. So you asked me about what are some of the mechanisms. These are some of the mechanisms. In fact, the CSOs, NCCE, the Electoral Commission, and others, including the GJA and other media organizations, came out heavily to drum home and draw attention to this huge infraction when it comes to fake news. So people were very, very alert, or are always alert. In fact, during the very last elections, clearly there was a lot of alertness. One of the biggest things that we also put in place, the GJA, on the issue of capacity building was that we had interactions, or we interfaced with, I would say, media, and not media, but election management organizations, such as the Electoral Commission, such as the police, such as media organization, media management organizations, CSOs. And these institutions are very, very important in the whole information value chain. Remember, we don't work in isolation. They all matter when it comes to information dissemination. So as journalists, in fact, when I was the public affairs officer, now I'm the vice president, we handled an intervention called Journalists for Peaceful Discourse, which was a training program that we deployed together with all these CSOs and media management bodies that I just mentioned. What did we do? We met with them together with the journalists. We traveled around the country collecting information on how do we manage this information that we are disseminating, and how do we also manage the information that we are collecting from these organizations, institutions that matter during elections, before we disseminate them. Now, it will amaze you. It will amaze you that a lot of information was gotten. That was the time that we had the issue with the centralization of information with the police, where the police had only Accra disseminating information. That was a big issue. It impacted heavily on how information was being disseminated. In fact, in a way, fueled the issue of fake, because by the time the issue would get verified from Accra, and it had happened in the Upper West region, the issues were already being bundled around left, right, center in different shapes and form. And this was one of the issues that our journalists within the regions brought to our attention, which we engaged heavily with Accra and the leadership of the police. We made some inroads, but it reverted to usual. And so we're saying that these are some of the things, but I would say that engagement with the people, the entities that we interface with when it comes to the communication value chain is very, very integral in curbing misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and what have you. Very, 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 very important and critical.
So I'm saying that from the standpoint of GJA, I know media ownership is one thing that you keep battling with, where politicians own the media and they sometimes use it for their own peculiar agenda. And in that instance, objectivity of the whole profession in that particular media house owned by a particular politician, one way or the other, becomes very hard to really adhere to. We saw, or in fact, I've seen interviews where journalists, professional journalists, and astute journalists, well known in the country, say that look, it is very hard to adhere to objectivity as a media, as a journalist, if you don't align to a particular political agenda or a particular belief or something like that. And so, my question to you as the vice president of GJA is that how hard is it for the association to train in-house journalists of various media houses who are bent on towing a particular line of agenda vis-a-vis the objectivity of the profession?
A very interesting question, Christopher. A very interesting question. And, interesting analysis as well from you. The issue about media ownership is a huge one. It would interest you to know that it was one of the issues that were picked up whilst we were implementing the project I talked to you about, Journalists for Peaceful Discourse, during the elections, which was a part to, bring our journalists up to speed with issues of elections, upskill their knowledge, and also help them to navigate more of a peace-sensitive reportage during the elections, which was paid for by the U.S. Embassy here in Accra. Now, it would interest you to know that as we traveled the length and breadth of the country, this was like the topmost issue that we encountered. Media ownership, the issue of media ownership and how it is having a bearing on information dissemination and what is being churned out. So the kind of media ownership and who owns the media, definitely the ideology permeates. And it's something that you cannot run away from. Now, we do know that a lot of political people or politically, exposed persons in Ghana own radio stations. This is problematic. This is not Rebecca saying. Just you and I know that if I own a station, I mean, I'm going to definitely, if I'm a politician, I'm going to drive my interests. And so this is why it is problematic. In fact, Christopher, we have, I think, 600 or more radio stations in Ghana. And I think that we need to begin to have, that's why I say we need to begin to have a certain conversation about. And in fact, recently, when the CRC, that's the Constitution Review Committee, you know that in Ghana, there's a committee that was put together by Prempeh Committee, put together by the current President Mahama, to look at how Ghana's constitution, what are the issues about Ghana's constitution, and look at some amendments and all of that. In fact, they've been going around the country collecting information and engaging stakeholders. The Ghana Journalists Association was engaged. I was in that meeting. One of the things that I said was we need to begin to have a conversation about media ownership. We need to have a certain conversation about when we are providing spectrum for people to have radio stations, and we know that the National Communications Authority provides the spectrum. The National Media Commission is responsible for content. We need to begin to have a certain conversation about more regulation, more oversight. And we need to ask people, what kind of ideology do they have? What kind of ideology are they promoting? I know that in the UK, radio stations are not all doing politics like we are doing in Ghana. Everybody's talking politics. And so there's a cacophony. And so is there no other issues besides politics? That's the question to ask. I mean, it's not late. We can talk about it and see how best we can address some of these issues so that we have radio stations who are just devoted women, devoted to maybe something about green gas, something about environment, something about sports only. So that you go to that station and listen to that. So it will also cut where everybody else is talking about politics. So it's as if politics is politics is, exciting. We're all politicians, but it sells. But in a growing democracy, in a growing environment, we need to begin to have certain conversations as we go along. And this, in fact, is our responsibility, you and I, WADR, Morgan, everybody. We need to begin to have that conversation where we should be concerned about what we put within our information ecosystem that is being consumed by the masses. Because the information is very integral to how we are building the thoughts processes and everything else that is happening to us as a people.
Especially during elections.
Especially during election. That is why we had, if you remember, I think Morgan talked very much about social media. Social media is pushing all this agenda. It's another conversation altogether. The issue about social media is another conversation altogether. We had, and we saw, in fact, Nigeria and other places where they shut down Twitter and all the other platforms. And I think that in Ghana, not this election, not the last election, I think the one before, there was a conversation, yes, about the IGP, not Dan Parry, the one here, having a conversation about, should not shut down. And then the media went like, don't even start that conversation. Don't even start, So you see a conflict there between providing the information and also oversight. Clearly, that's what we are confronted with as a nation now in Ghana. And in fact, if you look at the information that is going around, other African countries are also confronted with this issue of regulation. So in Ghana, we did not have enough regulation before we went out with opening up the space for people to own media. So media pluralism. We just open up the doors. So what we're doing now is retroactive firefighting approach. In fact, Morgan put it succinctly. The issue is greater than we think. Technology has overtaken us.
Right.
And there's research pointing to that, how we have been overtaken by technology and our problems have been magnified. So,
Right.
yes.
Right. Thank you very
Yeah.
much for that elaborate explanation, and of course, having all of those points well made out over there. But I mean, as you talked about social media, now podcasting has also become another means where it is unregulated by any professional body. The GJ would obviously focus on established media houses. But if I am in my room, I have set up my own equipment and I'm doing my podcast, hardly for the GJ to, of course, regulate what I actually churn out or put out there. And that would make me want to move to Morgan and then find out that. So, in the context of digital age, where now podcasting, among other means of communicating or sharing information, is widely accessible just by being able to buy a data you up on the internet, what should be the role of tech companies like Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter in moderating harmful political content during elections time? Or not necessarily political content, but during election time, how should content be managed by these tech companies on social media?
Well, I wish I could give you a very clear approach of how they could manage it. And even if you and I here, we give that approach, I'm not sure that they are going to do it.
Well,
Because
this
what is
WDR, we go far and wide.
no, I'm not saying that the approach will not be genuine. What I'm saying that the approach might hamper their own interest.
Okay.
And in this system, it is interest oriented. They make a lot of money out of allowing some information to circulate. In fact, it is the traffic that makes them being highly motivated and make a lot of money. So the interesting fact here is that fake news usually creates a lot of traffic. It is something amazing. That's why earlier on I was talking about the buzz. And the danger is that most of the people that are supposed to be the final, let's say, targets of any type of information, they are more interested in having access to their information through the social media than the traditional media that you and I we are used to. When it comes to the radio, yes, people listen to radio, but they are more inclined. People sleep with their phones. People do everything with their phones, and they are scrolling permanently. And for them, everything they see first, they give it credit. They don't doubt it. The first thing they do is to give it credit, and they are waiting later for people to come out with even any type of counter information to say that this is fake, even though there is any counter expertise to qualify it as fake. They have challenges accepting that it is fake, and some even don't want to hear about it because they believe that this is it, this is what we've been thinking, so it's a fact. So social media owners, as you identify them, in their way, their approach can only put in place measures that will fits the regulations. And you have already addressed it. We have a lack of regulation, not just in the international environment, but there are some specific states that have not yet decided or stepped out to regulate this kind of environment. It makes the ground very easy to navigate for anyone interested in fake news in these countries. And unfortunately, we in Africa are somehow behind the regulation process of this kind of environment, not because we do not want, because we have a lot to regulate even before making the decision to tackle this environment. And this is a huge concern. So what they could do is what they are already doing, because if they do more, it will hamper their interest, it will hamper the traffic creating. And there is a reason why some of the leaders of these companies have faced some inquiry before some parliament process in the Congress in the US, where they are considered as being a tool for not just fake news, but also for propaganda, be it politically or economically. They are considered as being threat. We've witnessed what not Facebook, but TikTok went through in the US. It is a concern, and they have been thinking about how to regulate. But at the end of the day, the idea was just to prevent it from keeping on coming and making use of its business. But when you look at some countries that are not considered as being fully democratic, I'm talking about China here, when you look at them, they have a certain way of regulating to the extent that they even control what kind of information you put out in the various social media. Some of the social media are not even allowed to exist within their framework, only because they are attempting to have control about which kind of information people have access to. And when you adopt this kind of policy, you are thoroughly considered as being against some freedoms of expressions and human rights. So it's a very sensitive situation, and sometimes it is easy to understand some of the political actors, some of the decision makers that decide, because they do not have any other regulation or measure to control what could be going around, whether it is fake or genuine, they just decide to shut things down. It's a decision that is, let's say, it is a double-edged decision. When you do that, you are considered as violating some fundamental human rights and
Freedom of
violating
expression.
freedom of expression. But on the other side, we don't know which kind of information they've received and what are the real threat on the fact. It could have the ability of preventing some fake news circulation, especially during a sensitive period such as let's say election period. But at the end of the day, I do believe that we cannot expect anything very intransigent from social media. It's how they equipped those who have in charge the regulation of media to come out with special regulation measures for election period. That will be very specific, and that will concern only the election period. If we can have that, I think we might prevent ourselves from being victims of some considerable fake news that could lead us where we don't want to go, because the period is so sensitive that any inappropriate information could lead the people to commit crimes that they will not be able to bear. We do remember the situation of Rwanda with the Milk-Colin voice that led to the genocide. And we have many other examples. I think I will leave that to the expert of media, but we have those examples that shows that if the information is not well handled throughout the election process, it's a serious threat to peace, stability, and development.
Very well noted. Well, we gradually heading towards the end of the debate, but while we end, um, Mr. David, you have actually touched on a very important thing that, in a quest of trying to regulate, may be seen as trying to curb or censor information which would be considered as an indictment of freedom of expression, which is one of the pillars of democracy. And so, in a democratic state, I would want both of you to have a bite on this, but first I'll begin with Madam Rebecca, under some 1 minute or two. In a democratic state, how should freedom of expression be balanced with regulations so that we have a fair and healthy society, rather than fake news, rather, dominating more of the information space? Because I see it as a dilemma.
You are very right. Freedom of expression, and in fact, the issue with regulation is one of the huge challenge that we have. And in fact, in Ghana, there are laws. There are laws. In fact, there's the issue with the Criminal Offences Act. You may have heard about the law that prohibits the dissemination of misinformation, and there are actually penalties, including up to 5 years imprisonment and a fine of 36,000 Ghana cedis, which the fine people have complained about not enough. But then there's the issue also with after the repeal of the criminal libel law during the Kufuor administration. 2001, I believe, somewhere. Why are we now having a Criminal Offences Act to criminalize free speech? So these conversations are going on. There's also been the argument that, it's important to deter, but then people, GJ, we've talked about the fact that we need to ensure that this is off the statute books. And there's also the Electronic Communications Act, which regulates electronic communication, including social media, to prevent the spread of, harmful content. People have said that this is very important, especially when it comes to information that piracy attacks and all of that. But we are saying, from the GJ point of view, we're saying that this finds its way. The police and others use that, and during elections and others, to again criminalize free speech and stifle freedom of expression. Because there's also the Cybersecurity Act, which mandates that social media platforms is to curb malicious information, content, and what have you. The laws are there here in Ghana. Some of these laws are there, but then, like you rightly said, there is this debate about stifling free speech. So how do we ensure that we have the regulation or regulations that are helpful? At the same time, we promote an environment of freedom of expression. Remember, Ghana's constitution, 1992 constitution, chapter 12, is devoted for freedom of expression. So people are always on that. We're supposed to speak. Why are you, disallowing us to speak? Why do you arrest us and all that? But I think that the conversation we're having, this and many others are what we need to have. We need to begin to use our platforms to promote the conversation about freedom of speech and responsibility. In fact, Ghana's constitution, there is this freedom of expression, but there's the responsibility clause, which people always don't talk about. There's nothing like absolute. Somebody's freedom starts where yours ends. So we need to respect the space that we have been given. We need to respect people's freedoms, and we need to respect others so that we can have ours. In fact, one big issue we're having now is the issue of defamation. People are just saying things anyhow within the space, and I think that we cannot continue like that. We cannot continue like that. So consciously, as media people, we need to draw attention to the harmful effects. That's not who we are as Africans. We don't speak anyhow, talk anyhow, say anything anyhow. We need to remember who we are as Africans in doing our work, even as journalists. Respect. respect is fundamental. Do you just talk to elderly person anyhow? So really, we need to go back and have these conversations on our platform. So I would like that we promote these conversations on our platform. Let us avoid sensationalism and promote conversations that are very important in consolidating our democracy. After all,
Right.
that's the work that we're supposed to do as media people, contributing to entrenching and promoting the democracy that we have.
Right. Madam Rebecca,
Through free speech.
yes. So your
Yeah.
wrap-up comment, Cote d'Ivoire is going to the polls this October. You have experienced elections over and over and over again in Ghana. We've seen how there's been lots of tension when it comes to elections, particularly in Cote d'Ivoire. Although there's tension in Ghana, but at least Ghana's tension is one that will not obviously degenerate into massive conflicts and then violence so much. But in Cote d'Ivoire, it seems to be one too many from 2000 through to 2020 as well. But this time around, they're going to elections. From your experience, what would you say to a country like Cote d'Ivoire to be very mindful about fake news and how it may have an impact on elections?
Okay, so in Ghana, to give you a quick example of how we have managed within the media space, I work at the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and I was also part of a monitoring mechanism that was put in place after Ghana had, the space had, there was challenges. So this is success story, so we can share with Cote d'Ivoire and others.
Sure.
We developed the media in Ghana, GBC, Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. We developed what we call guidelines for election reportage. So I think Morgan said that people should begin to have certain mechanisms in place to address some of these things, specifically for elections. And Morgan, I'll let you know, in Ghana, some of our success stories have been that media houses, such as the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, which is the mother of all media houses, which is turning 90 on 31st of July. 90 years old, Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, that has birthed all the media in Ghana. In fact, sets the pace, has guidelines for election reportage. And it has done so since I remember election 2012 that I have been directly involved with in election management and monitoring at GBC. Election guidelines have been deployed, and all news editors, all journalists or reporters are brought up to speed with these. In fact, there is an election, we call them, there's a monitoring team made up of editors and heads of all departments within GBC that are responsible for implementing these guidelines. And this is during elections alone. In fact, they report directly to the Director General on a weekly basis on the issues before, during, and post elections. So this is a mechanism that has worked. Before anything goes on air, it goes through a number of, guidelines that indicators that you have to cross-check before you actually go out there. So you realize that an organization like the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, barely would you hear something about fake news. Hardly. And so this is something that we have shared with other media houses. It would interest you to know that Joy News, City Channel One, and most of these media, in fact, Atenka Media, all came out with guidelines for election reportage in the very last elections. And you know, even within the media space, we did not record any major attack on journalists during the coverage of elections. It was the post, this Ablekuma North and all these issues are happening. And so that, again, is a gap for us to know that in deploying our strategies, we don't need to only deploy pre and elections. We also need to look at strategies to address post-election conflicts and other things, because winners and losers communicate differently. The winners will be all excited around. The losers are mourning. How do we, even as information disseminators, communicate in order not to incite in order not to incite the losers.
Right.
You understand? So
Yeah.
this, for me, is also a challenge. But all I'll say is that the countries that are going to elections, the media space, they must look at best practices. They should just look at best practices. How did Ghana make it? There's so volumes and volumes of information out there in terms of reports that are available. Election observers have reports, and we had numerous election observers come through. ECOWAS, the UN, EU, all these reports are available that the countries can look at and see how did Ghana make it. And I'm
Right.
sure that they will also be successful with the best practices that are there to show.
Right, Madam Rebecca Ekpe, thank you very much for that submission. Finally, Mr. Morgan, under some 30 seconds or 1 minute, your concluding remarks on fake news and its impact on elections, particularly as countries head towards elections, Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, in this October.
Oh, if you want, I can even do 5 seconds though, because she said it all, and I'm buying it with all the lunches that are possible.
Right.
Because it is very clear. The way forward is education and capacity building. She said it. And who are we educating and who are we enhancing? The people. When we have to enhance the capacity of the people in disseminating at their own level what is genuine from what is fake. If at my own level at home, when I'm scrolling a screen, I can see, okay, this sign shows me that this is likely to be fake. It is already good to prevent me from jumping emotionally and acting based on that information. We also need to build the capacity of the journalists. She said it, specific regulation for specific target, and not all journalists should be allowed to cover election periods, because some of them, they are just the way they are. We cannot really dictate the behavior to them, but there could be a way of selecting and giving accreditation to some key journalists that will be allowed to handle the election period. And at the end of the day, we also have to enhance or educate the political actors. They need to understand that there is a certain level of deontology that should be observed. Propaganda, yes, but any type of propaganda that threatens the stability, the peace and security of the country should be sanctioned with the last strength that are possible. But when you look at all these three targets, the two targets that are more or likely to respect the way forward are the people and the journalists. There is no need to spend too much energy on the political actors, but there is a need to focus on the people and the journalists to make sure that everything is secured at least at 90%.
Right. Thank you very much, David. David Morgan Asogba Metonji. Well, listeners, this is the much we can take on today's edition of Citizens Are, and today's debate was focused on fake news and its impact on elections. Our guests for today were the Vice President of the Ghana Journalists Association, who also doubles as the Editor-in-Chief of the state broadcaster, the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, GBC, Rebecca Ekpe, and also an award-winning broadcast journalist and a media advocate, plus David Morgan Asogba Metonji, the director of Morgan Training and Account, a consultancy firm which deals with capacity building and geopolitics, as well as the author of the book Making the ECOWAS of the People a Reality. I am Christopher Ticho. It's always a blessing and an honor coming your way with Citizens Are. Have a good day.